Hi guys, and welcome to this video run-through of some of your answers for the analysis questions for Rudyard Kipling's poem, The White Man's Burden. We're starting off with question number 1, which asks you, to whom is the poem addressed? And some of you answered that the poem is addressed to the white imperialists. Then you exemplify with a quote, take up the white man's burden. And this is all correct. Another group answered, the American government and others who want to try to start an empire or better the world with their influence. And this is also correct. In the introduction to the poem, Rudyard Kipling actually wrote The White Man's Burden, the United States and the Philippine Islands, because the poem coincided with the US Senate ratifying a treaty that placed Puerto Rico, Guam, Cuba, and especially the Philippine Islands under American control. So this was really sort of Kipling's greeting to America that, from his point of view, was now embarking on their own imperialist adventure. So both answers were correct here. The second question asks you, what does the burden consist of? And some of you wrote, the burden is to colonize and take care of the non-white civilizations and countries of non-white people. It's the duty of the white man to carry this burden, not for his own benefit, but for the benefit of the non-white. Kipling sees the colored as savages and believes that imperialism is a necessity in order to maintain law and order. Another group wrote, it is about traveling out into the world and colonizing countries. In their own view, they are helping the native people in many ways. They are feeding people, making them smarter, and a lot of other hard work. From their perspective, they're trying to do good. And a lot of your answers sort of followed along the same lines, which is very correct as well. All right, now the third question asked you what, according to the poem, is the purpose of the British Empire? And some of you wrote, they are feeding and curing and teaching, etc. Basically trying to do good, but again seen from a British perspective here. Yes, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. We have a quote here from the poem that exemplifies this, that it's to seek another's profit, to work another's gain, that they're doing this. To serve your captive's need, fill full the mouth of famine and bid the sickness cease. So we have a reiteration here of all the good things that the British Empire is actually doing here. They are serving their captives' need, those people that they, to some extent, hold captive. They are serving their need. They are filling full the mouth of famine, which just means that they're curing hunger. And they are bidding the sickness to cease, so they are stopping sickness. Another group wrote, the purpose of the British Empire is to help countries and colonizations who can't function without a power maintaining order. The British encourage the US to act in the same way that they have done. Yes, and this is the purpose of the British Empire in general, and the specific purpose of the poem is to encourage the US to start acting in the same way. All right, moving on to question 4. What is the price, or what is the consequence of British imperialism? Again, it's according to the poem. What is the consequence of having imperialism, as Kipling describes it? And some of you wrote that according to Kipling, the natives will be unhappy and cross despite the fact that the British are trying to help the imperialized countries. The blame of those you better, the hate of those you guard, the cry of hosts you humor. So what we have here is that even though you are bettering someone, what you receive is blame. And even though you are guarding someone, protecting them, well, you receive hate. Another group wrote, not all the native people want the help from the British people. They do not appreciate their hard work, and they do not see it as help. They want their countries for themselves, and they want to do it their own way. They do not want the British people to colonize the whole world and thereby taking control over the whole world. A consequence can be that the hard work can end in a war because the native people do not want their help. This is also correct. Moving on to question number 5. What are then the rewards of British imperialism, again according to the poem and Rudyard Kipling? Well, one of the rewards is that, well, they will have helped some countries, seen from their own perspective. Another group wrote, there are no positive rewards, that's why it's a burden. According to Kipling, the natives will be unhappy and cross no matter what, despite the fact that the British are trying to help these imperialized countries. The reward in itself is to help others, which really sort of goes along the same lines as the other group here that said that, well, they will have helped some countries. And this is also what this group says, that the reward is to help other people. All right, now moving on to question 6, which asks you to explain the conclusion in verse 7. Now, the conclusion in verse 7 went this way. Take up the white man's burden, have done with childish days, the lightly proffered laurel, the easy, ungrudged praise. Comes now to search your manhood through all the thankless years, cold-edged with dear-bought wisdom, the judgment of your peers. And some of you wrote as an answer that the conclusion in the final verse is the last push to encourage the Americans to start acting responsible. They need to grow up and take action. This will result in many thankless years of the above-mentioned hatred and blame. However, by taking this task upon them and finding adulthood, they will gain respect and acknowledgement from their fellow adults, like Britain. Yes, very good interpretation. And if we look at the actual poem here, the Americans finding adulthood is them being done with their childish days. And what they will earn in the end is the judgment of their peers, which, as this group answered, sorry, uh, their fellow adults, the Brits, they are their peers in this context. Yeah, that's a good answer. All right, moving on to the final question, which asked you about imagery, metaphors, and similes. You were asked to find no less than 3 examples of the use of imagery in the poem, and then you were asked to sort of try to explain what the effect of the use of imagery is. All right, first one you found here was fill full the mouth of famine. We already talked about this one, but yes. They're not really filling the mouth of famine full. They are trying to cure hunger, but this is sort of a more pragmatic image of them just, taking food and filling an actual mouth. That's not what they're doing. Maybe they're teaching the natives how to farm better, but this is sort of a more pragmatic image of it. All right, the next one, half devil, half child, describing some of the natives. As it says here, it further deepens the notion that the natives are savages and malicious. It's absolutely correct. They are not really, actually, half a devil and half child. It's a way of communicating the fact that the British think that they are very uncivilized. Finally, number 3 here, slowly towards the light. This is about bringing some of these native people towards the light. And the light here is referring to a state of enlightenment or knowledge. This is true. The light is very often the symbol of of knowledge, hence the term enlightenment. All right, and the effect of imagery. Well, some of you wrote that it gives us a mental image of something. It helps us to see a visual representation of what we're reading and to build an imaginary world or scene in our mind in correspondence to what we're reading, often making it easier to understand. And yes, especially the last part here is true, that this old saying that a picture says 1,000 words is it's a cliche, but it's also true. Uh, Painting an image, creating an image in the mind of a reader is a very effective way of communicating a ton of communication. Uh, it's just more effective than just the plain use of words. So yes, this is very correct. All right. I just want to take a minute to sort of commend your work and the quality of your work when it comes to these analysis questions for this poem. I was really impressed by the fact that so many of you really understood the actual message and sentiment of the poem. Usually, other first year students have a hard time figuring out whether this poem has a positive or negative attitude towards imperialism, and they have a hard time usually trying to figure out all the different terms, the different uses of imagery, the representation of the different sort of parties in imperialism. And most of you really had a correct understanding and a correct interpretation of the poem from the get-go. So this was really good work, awesome work, really also taken into consideration that we are doing this virtually. So yeah, kudos to you, and just keep up the good work. All right. All right, guys. Thanks.